The title of this dissertation is Racism or a Clash of Cultures. It is my observation that most acts of discrimination are inaccurately labeled acts of racism. Racists will always discriminate, but acts of discrimination may not necessarily be racist. I call most acts of discrimination a clash of cultures. Discrimination due to a clash of culture is not necessarily evil. In fact, in a non-racial context, discrimination is the accepted norm informing all social relationships. It is clear to me that racial discrimination must be punished. But cultural discrimination is a normal preference to surround ourselves with like-minded people. A resistance strictly due to a different color would be racist and should be resisted. Forcing the mix of non-like-minded people is a formula for creating resentment, hatred, and outright conflict. It could be counterproductive to drive even a moderate to racism. I say when the cause of discrimination is a clash of culture, then the solution to that resistance is far different and quite fixable in most cases. Outward racism in this country is quite evident in white supremacist marches. Mainstream people agree that this racism must be resisted and expelled. Outward racism is an animal instinct, as when it rejects the black sheep of the litter. Human beings are set apart from the animal world by a capacity for a higher level of thinking that had finally evolved 2 centuries ago to a level of enlightenment that all men are created equal. It took another century for this country to evolve to recognize that all color of men are created equal. Unfortunately, this enlightenment hasn't come to us all. It takes time for the work of evolution to completely lose these antiquated instincts. Therefore, there are traces of that bias remaining in our society. There are still Neanderthals among us. I will come back to this problem. The higher intellectuals of our society reject racism. Although still in our genes, we consciously suppress and reject racism, and the best of us work to compensate for it. Racism manifests itself in acts of rejection. Sometimes the rejection is displayed in blatant outward hatred, as in supremacist marches. More often the rejection is more subtle and rooted in fear and discomfort. This more subtle rejection is due to the clash of cultures. I observed that the victims of cultural rejection react in 2 ways to the rejection. Some counter-reject. Others redouble their efforts to blend in. Obviously, this is impossible to do completely when the distinction is color. But it is possible in all other ways, as was demonstrated by Barack and Michelle Obama in their ultimate example of achievement of assimilation. The Neanderthals never did accept the Obamas, but the majority of people did. He got elected. If it were not for the votes of hardcore party affiliation and ideologies, not just a majority, but a vast majority of voters would have been able to vote for Obama. For this reason, I reject the claim that this is a racist nation. We are as a well-intentioned nation as there is on this earth, but with bad elements. This is a very basic and important premise to the rest of my dissertation. Rejection of any type is not something that someone can experience without a great deal of hurt. But how one reacts to that rejection is all the difference in what direction that person moves on from there. Counter-rejection is a knee-jerk reaction to say, if I can't have it, I don't want it. Or to an extreme, I despise it. Or, of course, if both sides are rejecting, then there is certainly no hope for assimilation. I would like to explain what I feel is the cause of that rejection and how it can be turned into acceptance. First, we must remember that it is instinctive, benevolent human nature to form societies of like-minded individuals. The smaller the group, the more focused will be some of the similarities of the group, such as with bridge clubs or ski clubs. Even within those, other characteristics of personality and behavior must be acceptable, which usually means the members act and dress within unspoken ways or bylaws. The key to assimilation of an individual or group into another group or culture is a desire to adopt the interests, ideologies, and behaviors of the group you wish to join. Of course, I am not speaking of blacks joining a racist group. I'm speaking of a minority wanting to join a group comprised of the vast majority of well-intentioned Americans, the mainstream people of this nation who could vote for Obama. Also, adoption does not mean complete conformity and uniformity. Differences and diversity are what makes any group more fun, interesting, intelligent, and progressive. Differences that are interesting and attractive are by definition welcome, and therefore possible and normal. As an example, effective job interviews are all about a conscious effort to define ourselves with great deliberation to fit into the company culture while bringing a unique skill to the group. What I see in much of what is called racial conflict is the insoluble mixture of differing ideologies and behavior. Insoluble means the ideals and behavior of one person or group is not close enough to the traits of the other to peacefully coexist. It is like a mismatched marriage. The reaction to a forced unnatural blend can range from unease to fear to loathing within the whole group. The opposite of the natural and welcome assimilation I described above is the forced immigration such as attempted by the federal government that inserts projects for blacks into white neighborhoods. In doing so, they are not assimilating people. They are mixing cultures that may not blend. This is a formula for conflict. Divergent cultures don't mix. People are protective of their culture and fear when it is threatened that they'll lose it. To blend divergent cultures is to threaten both. The French are famously against letting English mix with them. The Spanish wiped out Indian cultures in South America, and the English and descendants did it in North America. The least threatening assimilation will be in smaller steps taken by individuals with personal motivation to drop their culture and adopt another. As a white guy, I can hardly understand what it is like to be a black guy to assimilate into a white world. But I can tell him what it would take for me to be at ease and welcome him into my circle, as I've experienced number of times in my lifetime. When I would close my eyes and listen to Barack Obama, I heard a man, not a black man. He sounded like me and talked like me. He seemed to have the same ideals and concerns and priorities as me. He liked sports, he told jokes and kidded. He likes politics, and so do I. When I open my eyes, I see a man with a great warm, welcoming smile, who dresses down and dresses up in the kind of clothes I would wear. So I think he'd like me, and we'd get along fine. I think my friends would like him too, because we tend to be somewhat alike. I think Barack would make any group a lot more fun and enlightening. So I'd like to hang out with him and introduce him. In this example, and in our previous election, it wasn't the color, it was the personality and behavior and look of that person that was key to his acceptance. Obama epitomized my ideals, the ideals of this country. The friends of my circle epitomized my ideals. Adopt the ideals of the group you wish to join, and they will welcome you. On the other hand, if you reject the ideals and behavior of a group, you cannot expect that group to welcome you. Had Obama felt he would be selling out to whitey and insisted to act black to please his peers, then he would never have been elected by the predominantly white Anglo-Saxon culture that we are. I am sure Barack Obama experienced a lot of hatred and rejection long before what I saw when he burst into the public scene. Despite this, he chose not to reject the predominant culture of the U.S., but to lead it. And by any measure of leadership, he has been unique and remarkably successful in all of history. And he is still very welcome in all the black community and not thought of as a sellout, as far as I know. If your goal is not to be president, you don't need the will and the skill of a Barack Obama to gain acceptance into the smaller community. What you need is the goodwill of an everyday person and the effort to adopt the ways of the group you wish to join. Where I feel our solutions have been idealistic but inappropriate and counterproductive is in our integration policies. I don't believe it should have taken more than a decade to solve our integration problems. 5 years should have been enough if we dealt with the root causes. Instead, we charged with holier and wiser than thou ideals and messed things up as we do with so much of our federal goals on the left and the right for conflict resolution. Those ideals were to enact laws and bus and force the mixing of mismatched cultures. In light of my above theory for the harmonious mixing of peoples and the difficulty of mixing cultures, the ideals were destined to fail and continued to fail. A greater emphasis on opportunity and less imposition on forced immigration would be a more effective, less confrontational, and therefore less counterproductive. Forced integration should only be applied to the extent of eliminating bylaws based on color. Forcing integration without regard for the desire for one side to join the other side to accept has and will lead to hostility that further promotes resentment and hatred. Successful immigration in the U.S. has often started with enclaves that offer a natural, familiar support group for new arrivals. In racial minority enclaves, I would like to see more efforts to improve the environment for a safer community, to enable more support and interaction within the community. At the same time, as part of that improvement, provide more opportunity to give the residents an equal opportunity to leave the enclave if it is their desire to become part of the broader surrounding majority society. It is the will to assimilate and the opportunity to learn the ideals and behavior and the economic skills to enable one to leave, which are key to leaving an enclave. And it is the adoption of the new culture that is the key to being well received by the surrounding community. If you have experienced discrimination after making an honest effort to assimilate in the spirit as I've outlined, I sympathize that you would be angry and speak up or even take action. If you have discriminated against someone who has made an honest effort to assimilate as above, you should be feeling guilt and be questioned, if not punished, for your action. If, however, your attitude and behavior is to reject the ways and ideals of the group you seek to join, then you have no right to be angry with that group for their rejection. A rejection of the group may gain you praise from your circle of friends, but it will only harden the resistance of that group against you. You can't get more out than you put in. On the other side of this interaction, if you honestly believe and act in good faith to welcome a minority person into your group, but find yourself rejecting him because he doesn't fit your beliefs or lifestyles, I don't think that you should feel guilty or be punished for your rejection of him. Harmony and cooperation is harmony and cooperation is a priority in any social group. However, in the interest of minimizing hurt, I will say I personally would feel inclined to explain in the politest of terms possible to anyone I rejected that my reasoning for the rejection is as outlined here. I did this in my business, not for racial reasons, but for smoking and behavioral problems that I did not wish to bring into my group. I said I would come back to racism. I certainly don't have anything to offer for a cure. I don't know any racists without right signs, so I can't advise how to even deal with them. But in watching those that do display the signs on TV, they don't look like my kind of people in manner or dress, and I would try to avoid and ignore them as I do others that rub me the wrong way. If I had a TV station, my cameras would not show up, never mind give them any coverage and encouragement. I would similarly not broadcast coverage of minority disturbances that do not portray the group in a positive way. Negative portrayals on the media foster stereotypes that lead to profiling. With that same TV station, I would emphasize images of my ideals and perhaps give only lip service to the negatives. An important aspect of racism in the clash of cultures is this issue of stereotypes and profiling. Profiling is quite normal in the insurance industry. When I got my driver's license, I had to pay a higher insurance than my girlfriend or my father. I had no driving record, so it wasn't based on me. It was based on the objective, statistical reputation of young men like me that I would probably drive faster and with less caution and be less inclined and be more inclined to have an accident. I was stereotyped and profiled to be at greater risk. Most people don't have access to statistics, but they do watch TV, which in the pursuit of viewers, the media displays ever more numbers and graphic, sensational images of hatred, murder, and civic destruction. The proliferation of cell phone cameras add to the content. The frequency of these images create anecdotal statistics in our minds that police are brutal, that gatherings of white males are racist, that young black men are thugs, that black crowds are destructive. We form an opinion based on our own experiences. We form opinions based on this anecdotal evidence. It is naive to denounce profiling to make it go away. Our impressions and our own experiences and our images lead us to form preconceived notions. Will any amount of words sway us from these notions, especially if we know what we personally saw or experienced? The experiences are a reality and a true personal statistic. For the short term, I think it is time for media to take responsibility for its role in promoting stereotypes and profiling. At the time of the writing of the Constitution, there was newsprint without photos. Let's consider a self-imposed media moratorium to omit images from news stories that promote negative stereotypes. For example, the media could agree that images of police brutality, the gathering of white males, of young black men breaking the law or acting threatening, and civic destruction by predominantly black crowds would be reported without images. At the same time, the media shows restraint. At the same time, the media shows restraint. The federal plan to go into problem areas to clean them up, reduce crime, and make them safe is a good way to make real changes to change the perceptions honestly. Once the areas are safer, the media will have fewer negatives to report anyway, and the media moratorium can end. On the critical subject of police brutality, any should be stopped, but I see our current approaches to be hard on police as counterproductive. Reducing the violence in the neighborhoods will make the police feel less threatened, and that will make them less jumpy. Police are subject to develop impressions and profile as much as any of us are. As much as they may be told to not do so or be trained to not do so, they have their own experiences and so must make a conscious effort to suppress their natural notions. In the stressful situations they face, can a conscious will dominate an ingrained fear? Not always. So they must be judged for their actions with a great deal of latitude for that occasional human failing. I have seen on the news not just white men, but also women and black men involved in suspected brutality. So the problem is not always racial. It is profiling. I suspect the black community and Black Lives Matter in particular would come down hard on me for this position, but I would not respond with this, but I would respond with this caution. It is my concern that the less leeway we give officers, the less inclined they will be to stay or join law enforcement. This would be great if it weeded out only hateful neo-Nazis, but I think the opposite would be true. I think normal, well-intentioned people looking to serve the public in goodwill in law enforcement would be less inclined to stay or join if, in addition to the street dangers they face, they would also face unacceptable administrative discipline and even the loss of a career in any field if negatively branded. I think the violent and hate-filled nature of neo-Nazis and others of similar bent would be more likely to want to stay with or join law enforcement for the opportunity to beat heads. This is, of course, the last thing any mainstream person wants. I recall as a young man starting my career decades ago, I was not comfortable with some of the people I knew who had a violent bent that were going into law enforcement for the appeal of beating heads. It is a reality that we need to work against. We don't want to promote it with counterproductive, hair-trigger reprimands that will drive out the best of law enforcement. There is no dispute that it can be a crime just for being black in white America. And so I've heard it said on the media by fathers to their sons to be extra careful and respectful. This is always a good idea for anyone. It is, in fact, a guiding principle for acceptance.